Morning. Hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to the Quilt Show and Saturday Sampler. Glad that you are here. And I was thinking this week as I was looking back across, where we've been. It's been a lot of time, lots of weeks of making blocks and learning new things and how to be innovative in a way to make the blocks work so that they all fit together. And so it's been a little bit challenging, it's been a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed the journey so far with you. Today we have our last block, which is kind of exciting. Hands all around. And what I would like to hear from you today, because I'm curious, is what was your favorite block? And if you have a reason for it being your favorite, let me know. And then what was your least favorite block? And a little bit of why that might have been your least favorite. So think about that for a little bit. And if you can throw that in the chat room, I would find that to be interesting as I plan for future shows and future things that we're going to be teaching here. I think Kristen and I have found a great lineup of things to share with you on the next segment when this quilt is done. We have today's show, and then we have two more, putting the top together, because it's a little different because we have to fit in all these different sizes of blocks, which is going to be fun, and then putting on the borders and talking about the quilting part of it and all of that. So if you would be conversationalist today and share in the chat box what you really liked and what was a challenge for you, and so your favorite and your least favorite blocks. Today we're going to be working on the block Hands All Around. It's our last one. It is it's a 16.5 inch, so it's again another one of those larger ones that we have. Let me drop down to the book, and this is the block. There's plenty of fabrics to choose from to, get this block to be exciting for you. And I know some of you who have shared a few of the pieces and things with me. This is absolutely, you've done a beautiful job with some of the fabric choices. So I know you will for this too. All right, this one is a challenging block, but it's very doable because we've gone through pretty much everything that's listed in here. I am going to share with you the way that I sew. I believe when we did the Lemoine star back when, I shared my method of putting a Lemoine star together, and this is a half Lemoine star in here on these points of the block. So I'm going to share that again with you, and putting it on the sides and these holes that are left where we insert a block. I did this block both hand method and by machine. I'm sharing the machine method. I don't know that one was necessarily better than the other until you get to this point right here, and it and the only reason that I would say that the hand method was easier is turning those corners and points, but I'm going to do it by machine today to share that with you on that particular point of this block. So with that being said, the other thing that I want to talk about is this A block. It has rounded curves, and when you're putting these curves into it, coming out correctly at this point, it's not hard. It's just a little bit tricky, and got to kind of keep your mind on what you're doing. But make sure that you trace your template and that you get your 1/4 inch seam put in there quite well. And to do that, I ended up making this twice. because I found that I did not quite have it. So I made the template, I cut out my piece, and then I cut away on one side my 1/4 inch seam, and then I used my little disc. And but it's just as easy if you're using, template plastic. I like this because it stays put with the freezer paper, and I don't have to worry about it slipping on my hands. And I, just drew right around that. And so as I was getting my seam in there, I was pretty accurate on the points of getting it, because that was the only little bit of a tricky part in this particular piece. So wanted to mention that, and let's get to work. So the first part of this, let me get these out of the way for now. And I did, 3 of the sides prior to coming on today, just to make it go a little bit quicker. And I found the center point by simply folding. I took it up here, I folded it, and just finger pressed that right in there. And doing the same thing with this, folding it over, pressing that center piece. Now, one of the things that I would like to share with you is that, for whatever reason, the day I was sewing this, the practice one, I sewed without hardly any pins at all. And then when I was putting this one together, I needed pins. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin, but you can also glue. So now I'm going to put a pin where those two, at the 1/4 inch where they intersect, those two lines that I drew. And now I'm coming to this side, and I want to get my pin right where it needs to be, because that curve on the end just makes it a little bit tricky to know where you're putting your pin. And I hold this between my my 2 fingers here, so that it's straight, and I know that I'm getting it on there exactly where it needs to go. I put another pin slightly to the right of it, just to hold that in place. And this is on a bit of a curve. 2 things: I found that it was just as easy to sew it first and then clip the curves. It seemed to it lies flat without clipping the curves when you iron it. But simply to help that I would not have any points, whatever, I went ahead and clipped the curves, and then I pressed it. So you can kind of see what it does for you, and that it depends a little bit on your sewing. So I've put 2 pins in between, and now I'm going to go to this side. So you can see I'm doing a lot of pins. And some people are very good at sewing these curves without any pins at all. Ricky Timms is one of those. And then I'm getting that right where it needs to. I'm getting that pin between my 2 fingers. And now I'm going to drop another pin in right beside it. And, if you don't get these corners in very well, you end up with, they don't leave that, let's see, where am I talking? Your 1/4 inch seam line and those points don't quite match up the way they should if you aren't getting that corner in there. So you'll want to work at doing, making sure that you're getting those in. And when you're pinning this, that white centerpiece wants to bunch up a little bit, just keep thinking about that and keep moving it out of your way. And so I'm actually going to be really ridiculous today and add another pin in there. This one seems to be floating around on me. All right, so I've got the pins in, and now I am going to the machine and very easily getting, the needle right where, that comes in. So I can watch both my line, my pins. I can get that, on there straight. Generally speaking, I sew with the other side on top. That way I can control that white one. But I don't know. I just sometimes get a little flustered on camera. I don't know if I'll ever get over that. It's like that first day of school when I was teaching. I was always flustered on that first day. It's like, why the first day? And I am going to use a stiletto and make sure that the bottom, what I can say on this is just go slow. And if you have any questions or comments that you would like to make, that would be helpful to everyone as they sew this, please feel free to put that in the chat box. And as you're watching me sew, check the chat box. I find that from time to time people have some very helpful comments to make and very helpful to the process that we're sewing. And there's many of you that have been sewing for a long time, and you've got your own set of tips and tricks to work on and make these happen and come out very, very nicely. And I appreciate that. And there are many stilettos out there, and I use a beautiful metal one that that a friend Sharon made for me, and I really love that one, and I use it a lot. But when I'm going on something this tight, where I know that my hands are going to get I will use a wooden one, and this is simply a here it's in the screen. This is simply a wooden orange stick that you use, that you can buy with your fingernail polishes and stuff like that. And the reason that I use the wood is that it doesn't pierce the fabric, and the wood kind of adheres to the cloth and moves on. The other one that is excellent, I can't find it since I moved, so it's in a safe place, is the one that Alex Anderson's, because hers is wooden. So now we have this sewn in, and we're going to press it out. And again, you really don't want to, and I've got a little bit of bulging in here, and that's where I'm going to use when I get this block done and I press it for the final time. I'm going to press it with the precision pressing, because that'll relax all this fabric a little bit. So if you are finding that yours is doing a little bit of the same thing that mine is, then we can use the Acorn precision piecing. And I know that to make it easier for you, Kristen pretty much puts the links right into the chat box so you can find it easily if you don't have it, or if you've never tried it. I absolutely am thrilled that I learned about it. So now here is where I may go back in. Whoops, and I lost my scissors. And clip those curves just a little bit around. I'll do that later instead of right now. So let's put this one aside, and then we're going to be making this unit. And this is that partial Lemoine star. And what I really want to accomplish is that these two come down to a point, and and I've done 3 of them already. So each one, that point is right there with your 1/4 inch seam allowance on it. And so you will have your 2 pieces here. I want to turn them right side up so that it's easy. And then you have the little bit larger triangle, and you have your 4 diamonds in this. And you have the only place that I actually marked this was on the square, and I did 2 sides marking because that's really all I needed, and so it was a little bit quicker for me. So to make this block, you have if you use 2 different fabrics, you can use 4 different fabrics, you can use all the same fabric. It doesn't matter on this as long as you have your 4 diamond shapes. But before I move on to this, I just looked here and I want to see if you had any questions. Good morning, everyone. Melanie, Alex is doing good. She is recovering and recouping at home. John is taking very good care of her. So, what presser foot am I using? I'm using the 97D. I have that engaged. All right. Oh, they said that Alex's stiletto is sold out at the moment. So if you're interested in one, it's a 4-in-1 tool, which is absolutely wonderful. And so she's got the links there. All right, let's go back to our block. So I am putting, as you saw, the 2 florals as they did in the book, and then I've got my 2 on the bottom. So I followed the book pretty much each week so that it made sense to you as I was putting it together. So I've got this, I've got one of my smaller triangles, and I'm going to start putting this together. So I match up my points, and you can cut these by template or you can measure them and cut a larger square and cut them twice on the diagonal to get these. Or these, I think the smaller ones are half square triangles, and the larger one was the cut twice on the diagonal. So you can do it either way, by template or otherwise. All right, so let's go to the machine. And I put that point basically under my foot, and the fabric isn't quite touching the needle, but it's close. And then I sew from the point because I want my point to be, I don't want it to move on me, and it has a tendency to want to do that depending on your machine and how it sews for you. And I sew all the way through. All right. And then let me go here. I'm going to just finger press it down. Then I'm going to take one of my floral pieces, And I'm going to do exactly the same thing again. I'm going to get those points together, and I'm going to bring it down here. My 1/4 inch seam, that gap is supposed to be there like that. Let me make sure you can see it. And then again, it's going to go under the machine and chest, and I want to make sure that it stays put. And again, I am going to sew through a couple of stitches past where that seam line goes, and here I'm going to use my cutter because I know that it's got that those extra holding stitches, but I can remove that. So now I've got this seam, and as you can see, you can't sew down and you can't move it. And that's where and this is really an accuracy thing for me, because I find, now here I'm going to put and cut that knot right there. Then I'm going to use the back side of my seam ripper, and I'm going to pull up those 2 threads on this side and the 2 threads in the seam line on this side. Now I know that I've hit that, and I've not added any bulk at the point where normally when you sew this type of block, you stop, back stitch, and so you would have a stop here, a back stitch, a stop here, and a back stitch here, and that adds that extra bulk, and you don't always get that point nice and sharp. And I found that taking those 2 threads on either side was very helpful to me. So now, as you can see, I've got my 1/4 inch opening. So this folds back on itself. I match up my points up there, and interestingly enough, if you have sewn carefully, when you put, I'm doing a little pinch right there so you can see this. If you've sewn and you match up your points, that little point should fold right into the point, and everything should line up really well for you. So just to keep it in place, I make sure this is lined up well and drop a pin right in here just so that it doesn't slip under. And I go back and I line this up, get my point straight, and again I am sewing from the point down. And here's where it's kind of important with that leader piece, because you really don't want the bird nest on the back of those points. And here, simply because I know my machine and I know how many stitches and where I need to stop, I can go ahead and finish that off because I know my machine. And if you know your machine well and you know exactly where to stop, you can stop and right at that point where the 2 come together. And I know I'm not using, so as you're coming down, I went ahead and stopped right where this seam came up and this seam comes down. The other thing that you can do for accuracy again is simply sew through all the way to the end, and then this one, because it's on an angle, you remove the 3 stitches on the other side. You just remove those 3 stitches that you went behind, and then you're not pulling it at the end. It's not going. You really do get a very accurate seam that way. And so let me check and see. Sound is bad. I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure why it should be. All right. So I don't see any particular questions. If you have any, if something isn't making sense, let me know. All right, so now when I open it, what I love to see is that my point is right on the money. And now I'm going to press this, and I push into that corner. And then right now, because I'm not quite ready to get rid of those other two, I'm just going to press my iron right at that center. So it's kind of popping up, and it's only because I haven't ironed those two sides. All right. And now I have that piece. My corner is intact. This down here is exactly where it needs to be. And now I'm going to take and do the same thing with the other side. All right. All right. So again, so you can see it one more time. Line up my points. I'm going to drop a pin just to hold that bottom in case you have a machine. Sometimes it's user error, but my machine will sometimes pull it, and that pulls away from there. And then you're going to get, right at this point, it will pop up and it will move on you. So, again, right under the machine. I sew right off of that. All right, open that up. I, make sure that seam is finger pressed down. Lining up my points again. And the Sew Steady mat that I have on my machine certainly helps me keep right on track with that. And again, I'm going to go a couple of stitches beyond that. Use my scissors and cut it. All right. And then again, I am going on this side, and where I cut it with the scissors, I just put my, seam ripper right under there, cut that little knot, and then I release those two stitches, release them on the other side. All right, then this will fold back on itself. That little piece there should fall flat and crease right at the point where that point comes in there. This is where another pin just holds everything in place and doesn't move on me, and I can keep that accuracy that I'm looking for, making sure my points are right where they need to be. And then going back to this, getting that in there. And as you can see, I can run my, this time I'm going to sew directly through just to show you how that comes apart. And my pin was a little close. How I unstitch that. Get all these little threads out of the way. And then, so my seam line is going, and I probably should have used a darker thread. I always think of that when I'm here. So I've taken those stitches out, you know, leading up to these still cross and they're still attached, so you're not going to have gaposis there, where that comes in. And I'm going to again, I like to press these seams open. They just seem to lay a little flatter, and I don't have as much bulk in that center piece. So I push up there, and then I, you know, let the iron sit and get that point. All right, so now I have these two pieces, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing with this one. And so I'm flipping that over. Again, I want my points to line up. I want my bottom to line up. And here is where I'm going to kind of do my fingernail on that piece. Get that back straight. All right, let me get this cut off there. All right, now I've got that side on. Again, I want my seam to go down. I'm going to put this one on, line up, and again, I'm going to press that a little bit with my finger, just so I don't have to struggle with it to lay nicely. Lining up my points. And actually, if it goes this way, you're lining it up and those two, and so when you start sewing, it should hit right at the 1/4 inch line. But because of the way, you know, the pressing is going a little bit later, I am going to leave that just like that. All right. And under the machine. And again, I start at points. If you start at a point, you know it's going to be together, and I don't have to worry about machine pulling whatever at the bottom. So again, here, making that knot on that side. And then again, I flip it over on this side so I can see those, getting rid of the knot that I made with my machine, just with the scissors on the machine. I remove those 2 stitches there on that side, open it up, fold this back, match up my points, get this settled in there. Put in my pin. And here's where I want to be very careful to get, you know, those seam lines right on there. And my points should line up nicely. Put a pin there. All right, so I have that pinned so that those are where they need to be. And this one I must have come off or maybe didn't cut it quite well. So I might have a little bit of a, because it's wanting to pull right there at the middle. And because I'm talking and on screen, I'm going to drop a pin just so that I know it's going to stay put, and it's probably the lack of ironing on that. So, you know, for me, quilting is you know, constant adjusting and just knowing what your machine and what the whole, you know, process is going to do, and where, you know, your machine deals with it, how you deal with it. Like, for example, today I can see that it's probably not my best sewing day because I'm using an awful lot of pins, which I don't necessarily do. I'm going to go off this again, simply because I can use my, you know, I could have stopped at that point and used my cutter on my machine. And just getting rid of all this stuff. All right. And again, opening that up, I now have those points. They've come together and they match. This just always looks good simply because I sew through and remove those stitches and kind of do it that way. Again, I'm going to press open this center point, and that one stitch I need to release where I ended it, so that folds open. Press that in, and now I can go through. I'm going to press this one open. You know, we're going to move around pressing this, and these are going to go to, basically they're going to move to the right as I, you know, press all this. And get that to lay nice and flat. And, you know, squaring this up, I'm going to put my ruler so that my 1/4 inch seam lines, let me get are right at my 1/4 inch hits right there and hits at that point. And if I need to do any adjustments, I can get rid of my points and clean that up and square that off, so that, you know, I've got my 1/4 inch, I've got my 1/4 inch. I can take and, you know, remove those little bunny ears, just to eliminate bulk. And because I'm not putting the other half on it, and I don't need to necessarily match that with you know, the other side of a Lemoine star, I'm simply going to remove that extra fabric in there. Get rid of all of that. All right, so now I have this, and I would sew this onto the side of this. I will refrain from, and actually you want it where your line is coming down and across. You want to sew on that line there, and you're going to stop a 1/4 inch away from that end. That's why I've left that seam line there, so that you can remove those 2 stitches or stop right at that point, because when we turn to put the blocks together, that is, you know, going to make a difference on that. So let's go. Um, so now we have our units. You're going to match up that center seam line with this. Drop a pin, and you're going to sew up to a 1/4 inch away from that edge. You've got your seam line right here, where either you can stop with your machine, sew through and remove those stitches again, whichever is working, well for you in terms of that. So you're going to sew that, and then once that is sewn in, it comes up. You'll turn this side just like we've been doing all along. Then you'll sew this there, leaving that 1/4 inch seam line. But actually what I am going to be doing is I'm going to, before I sew this across here, I'm going to do what I've been doing, match that up, and then I will sew this to this, and then sew up that piece. But remember to leave your 1/4 inch away so that you have that 1/4 inch opening there, and you can sew that in. And it's at this point where on this last part, I found was a place where the hand stitching worked a little bit better. It was just a little less awkward when you're turning that corner, which we've done on several of the blocks, 3 or 4 of those particular blocks, and you can just manipulate a little bit better when you're hand stitching. So I will probably, when I sew that across there, I will probably when I turn it, instead of wrangling that under the sewing machine to get that, I'll just probably do it by hand, and I already have my markings on there, and I can just sew from that point, and I can stop right there as we've been doing all along. And if you haven't haven't sewn for a while, and then you put the block up there. Once those are sewn together, then on the corners you sew your large triangles. Let me grab the book. And on the book, so when you get those all sewn in, you have a piece that looks like this. Put one of your star points to the top and sew your 4 corners on, square it up as I showed you at the top of there, 1/4 inch away from the seam. Sew your block in, and you'll have your 16.5 inch hands all around block. Let me look to see if there are any questions that I need to pay attention to. All right. Sherry, that's a great suggestion on there. The hardest block was mill wheel. Okay. Lay flat. Yeah, sometimes it's just some little thing that makes a block not work. All right. Kristen has put the thank you, Diana. I want you to part of what I do as a teacher is I want you to be successful. And if there's another way that it can be done that looks a little bit easier, it works for you, then I want to be able to do that. And I've learned from other people along the way easier ways to do stuff. All right. What kind of mini iron am I using, and is it available? Yes, it is. It's from Dritz, and it's just this little hand iron. I love it. It gets nice and hot. It doesn't turn off, and it helps everything to lay flat, and it's small enough to work on this little piece right here next to me. Oh, Kristen answered that. Good. Thank you, Kristen. And the favorite block is the Lemoine Star. It's my favorite block. Well, thank you. I've never been called brilliant before, Lynn. Thank you for that. All right. So I think I've answered. And if you come in later, on YouTube or something, let me know about the blocks that you liked, and the ones that you didn't, and for future reference. We can work on some of those things that were still a little bit difficult and for you, and we'll see what we can come up with. So I want to be as helpful as I can to the majority of you. So next week we are going to put that top together, at least talk through it. It's a bigger quilt, so can't get everything under there. We'll do some talking about partial seams and sewing, each of those sections together and getting the top done. And the following week, we will put the borders on, and your top will be done. And when we put the borders on, we'll talk about finishing, off the quilt, and also maybe some possibilities for the quilting of this quilt. And then we're going to be moving on to other things, and we'll share those with you. Kind of excited about a few things that are coming up after this quilt. But I've truly loved doing this quilt alongside of you. So I will see you next week. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, and do something fun and different if you can. All right.